Well, what happened in 2016 is a clear and unambiguous signal that the masses had simply moved on, that there was a growing awareness that was forming in these online communities, these networks that propelled Donald Trump into office. These networks, these network men, are forming the foundation for new parties, new communities, new groups of people that are poised to take collective action. In other words, this is just the beginning of something profound and revolutionary. Welcome back to Men and the City. In today's video, we are going to talk about network men. As most of you know, my channel is about neo-masculinity, but the root of neo-masculinity is the masculine. What is masculinity? Obviously, it is a subjective idea to some degree, one that has become controversial in recent years, as we know. But ultimately, masculinity is an archetype, just as femininity is an archetype. And an archetype is an initial imprint. It is a prime directive. It is an initial starting point for your navigation and orientation in the world. So neo-masculinity is essentially an adaptation. It is an adjustment of that. And that's what's noteworthy about archetypes. Archetypes are adaptable, they are dynamic, they transcend time and environment and circumstance. And neo-masculinity is simply the latest adaptation. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, as we know, over the last several decades, there is a crisis of masculinity that has beset the Western world. And there are various causes for this, feminization being one. Subversion of Western institutions by globalism, wokeism as it has come to be called, bureaucracy, or even modernity itself, the ambiguity about what a man, particularly a man who's urban, who lives in the city, is supposed to be, or how he's supposed to live his life. And this frustration, this alienation that began in earnest in the early 2000s, particularly because of online dating, which turned the sexual marketplace upside down and force-fed this kind of compressive force to men in ways that were previously not terribly noticeable or meaningful. What that started was a search for community. Men felt lost. They were alienated and isolated from a society that increasingly turned against them. And so what they began to do is migrate into online networks. Now, this took off in the early to mid 2000s because of the emergence of super networks like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and beyond. And since the early 2000s, these networks and more have simply multiplied and scaled to unimaginable heights, heights that transcend geographies, nations, continents, etc., etc. But what's interesting about all of it is that even though this was a technological permutation, what drove these men, and indeed what drives most of these online networks, is a very human need for connection. Now, what is a network per se? Well, a network is a series of nodes or links or connections that communicate with one another and take action in some way, shape, or form. And so we saw the dawn of what was called, or what has come to be called, the manosphere, which is really just an umbrella term for men that have migrated into online communities in search of all kinds of things. It could be help in the dating market, it could be self-improvement, it could be political awareness. Awareness being the key term, because eventually what these networks really became were awareness machines. These communities facilitated dialogue and connection that discuss controversial ideas or taboo topics that for decades were left largely neglected by the masses. Well, that changed because of these online networks. The power and effect of these networks, these awareness machines, went largely unnoticed until the election of Donald Trump. When Donald Trump became president in 2016, it was shocking to the legacy system, who for decades had controlled, so they thought, the consciousness of the population because they dominated the mainstream networks. Well, what happened in 2016 is a clear and unambiguous signal that the masses had simply moved on, that there was a growing awareness that was forming in these online communities, these networks that propelled Donald Trump into office. Now, we know the rest of the story. We know that the response to that was censorship, an attempt to shut down these networks. However, what's particularly interesting is that these networks not only were not shut down, but they became antifragile. In other words, the shock of censorship to them actually made them stronger. And the hunger, the thirst, the drive for more dialogue, for more controversial thinking, for more dangerous discussion has only surged in recent years, largely because of censorship. And that speaks to the strength of these networks and where we're headed. Now, there's three characteristics that I think are particularly noteworthy about these networks. The first is that they are leveraging technology. And technology, as we know, is dynamic. It's allowing connections and community to be built in ways that we've never seen before. Not just in the manosphere, not just to talk about dating or things of that nature, but monetary networks like Bitcoin, which are growing across the globe and threaten, in a very real sense, the legacy banking system. So technology is a powerful force in this sense that has broken containment. It's not controlled. It's not subverted, at least not to this point in time. The second is the rise of a new kind of leadership cadre. These are influencers, and influencers are literally building online communities that are becoming increasingly powerful. Some, you might say, are veritable movements, and others are beginning to take collective action. Examples of this run the gamut. You have the Red Pill community, which was started in earnest by a man named Rollo Tomassi, but that sort of became or transformed into a kind of masculine movement by a guy like Andrew Tate, for example, who's literally set up networks that he calls the War Room, which are groups of men across the world. It's a membership organization of sorts. In addition to that, we have Elon Musk, and Elon Musk has gone a step further. Elon Musk not only is an influential person who leads a kind of technology company and community itself, but he is also the owner of a platform we call Twitter, which has become a staging ground for resistance, for discussion, for controversial thinking in ways that we've never seen before. And because he owns the platform, he is literally incubating these kinds of collective action movements and networks, whether he understands that or not. Think of Elon Musk in this sense as almost like the Duke of Orleans, who started the French Revolution, because on his estate, the Palais Royal, he housed all of these cafes, like the Jacobins, for instance, that were actively discussing, organizing political opposition to the legacy government. And of course, in 1789, we know what happened. Bang, you had a social, economic, and political crisis that then set these cafe organizations in motion. Well, a very similar thing is happening on Twitter. The third piece that is perhaps more important than the technology and the influencers themselves is the rise of Masco-nationalism. Because Masco-nationalism, which is really the result, synthetic product, you might say, of the awareness machines that all of these online communities have become. And that is to say, Masco-nationalism is an awareness that the national identities of people in the Western world specifically are being subverted, undermined, and destroyed. That our sovereignty and the defenders of that sovereignty, who happen to be men and masculinity, are under direct threat. That sense is fueling these networks forward in ways that we've never seen before, particularly because the legacy system itself is breaking down, whether it's currencies that are blowing up, or banks that are deleveraging, or poverty that's spiraling, or mass immigration that's overwhelming populations from Germany and France to the United States and Canada. What is happening here, ladies and gentlemen, is that these networks, these network men, are forming the foundation for new parties, new communities, new groups of people that are poised to take collective action. In other words, this is just the beginning of something profound and revolutionary. And it's particularly noteworthy at this point in time because the legacy system, as I said before, is sort of spiraling out of control and very definitely, in my view, creating a kind of power vacuum because it's starting wars, because it's printing its currency into obsolescence, because it's destroying the economy. Now, while some people think that this is purposeful, whether it is or it is not terribly meaningful at this stage, because network men and the networks that they control are poised to fill that vacuum. As legacy institutions lose their power, lose their productivity, their efficiency, which is what we're seeing in states like Florida and the Carolinas, for example, on the heels of this devastating hurricane, and legacy institutions like FEMA can't do anything about it. Again, whether it's by corruption or inefficiency, these new networks are going to surge to fill the vacuum. This is where we're headed. This is what the neo-masculine movement that I talk about is all about. Stay tuned for more, and we'll talk soon.